Well, welcome and thank you all for joining us today. I'm Charisse Reese, Managing Partner for True Benefits, an Alera Group company. Just want to start with a few housekeeping items to get us started. We will be recording today's presentation. All participants are muted, but we do welcome you to ask questions throughout the presentation using the Q&A feature. I'll be monitoring those questions and we'll take some time to reply throughout the presentation and at the end, time permitting. True Benefits, along with our partner Alera Northwest firms, Propel Insurance, Wilson Albers, Davidson Benefits Planning, and CSNW Benefits, are happy to bring you information today on the basics of Washington State's pay transparency requirements, which are going into effect on January 1st. Our speakers, Ann Fosburgh, partner at CompensationWorks, also an Alera Group company. Ann's located in Salt Lake City and has over 30 years of compensation experience and expertise. She's held several senior level HR positions at multiple organizations and has extensive experience across industries, helping businesses connect the compensation dots between their people and financials to put their best foot forward. With that, let's start our presentation. Please welcome Ann Fosburgh with CompensationWorks. Thank you, Ann, for joining us.
Yes, thank you, Charisse. Thank you for the nice introduction, and welcome to everyone that is joining us today. We are going to go to our agenda here. And so we are going to talk about pay transparency, kind of an introduction for those of you that are not in the compensation world on a daily basis. We're going to talk a little bit about that, briefly review the Washington Equal Pay and Opportunities Act in its entirety. I'll kind of zoom through that. And then we're going to spend the bulk of our time on how to prepare as an organization to be more transparent with pay and benefits. That is part of the legislation. But pay is definitely an area that a lot of organizations are not as prepared as they might want to be to not only share pay ranges and pay information with candidates, but also with their existing employee base. At the end, as Charisse said, we hopefully will have some time for Q&A, and I look forward to that. That's always the most fun part of doing a presentation. So the first part I want to start with is, what is pay transparency? And before all that recent legislation that's been coming across states and in jurisdictions, there was already pay transparency conversations happening in a lot of organizations. It was aligned with their culture. It was aligned with how they wanted to administer compensation. They wanted to involve employees and managers. But obviously, the legislative activity that has been happening over the last few years has moved that ball further down in kind of that transparency spectrum. And so Washington is not the only state that is or will have pay transparency components of their equal pay legislation. Colorado actually has very robust pay transparency legislation that has been on the books since 2021. Connecticut, Maryland, Nevada, Rhode Island, California. Governor Newsom recently signed legislation that is very similar to that in Washington. And so there's definitely state level mandates that are happening. And I would envision that this, I guess, momentum will continue into the future. Definitely, when you think about what kind of requirements are part of that legislation, it definitely differs by jurisdiction. Some is just for candidates, some is for employees, some is for job postings. And there's a lot of work that is being done in the New York area. There are some jurisdictions in New York City is going to have a very similar bit of legislation go into effect in November. Westchester County, for those of you that are familiar with the New York area, kind of those surrounding areas of New York City also have very similar requirements. So I mentioned the pay transparency spectrum, and I've used actually this slide for a long time in talking with our clients. And most companies fall somewhere on this spectrum. Some of them are less transparent, where Managers are the only ones that are talking about compensation with individual employees. And then the opposite end of the spectrum, I think of government entities, public entities, where everyone knows your salary. Most organizations fall somewhere on this spectrum. And so I want you to think about, before we move into kind of what this all means, where is your company on this? Have you defined a philosophy? Have you done a market study? Do you have pay ranges? Do you have managers that are prepared to speak to employees about compensation? This is where the new law takes us. So there are very much companies that have not moved very far in this transparency spectrum. And there's a gap that is going to need to be filled in order to be prepared. So what I'd like to do next is walk through key components of Washington's Equal Pay and Opportunities Act. Some of this has been on the books for a number of years, but I think it's just important to kind of take a step back and realize that this was not an isolated act that was passed. It is an addition to an already robust Equal Pay Act in the state of Washington. So back in 2018, the legislature passed laws that basically provided that equal pay for similar work, for allowing for career advancement, for open wage discussions, and protections from discrimination and retaliation as it relates to employees talking about wages was passed. And so all of that has been hopefully integrated into your organizations and into how you administer compensation and how you make decisions on compensation and your policies related to how to make those decisions. In 2019, that act was amended to provide for protections for applicants for newly posted or newly hired positions, where you can't ask for the wage and salary history of that individual. And that too was put in place to try to mitigate some of the items where if you hire someone at a low wage, that is perpetuated kind of through their career, because organizations just continue to add pay in smaller increments based on what they were making in a previous organization. So that was all put in place in 2018 and 2019. And then the most recent amendment is the pay transparency requirements that basically are requiring that employers, and an employer is anyone with 15 or more employees in the state of Washington, proactively disclose in every job posting. So this is whether or not you're going out to the world to hire someone, or you're going to do an internal posting for a promotional opportunity, that the company provides a wage scale or a wage range and a general description of all of the benefits that will be offered to the applicant. And so this is a big change. This is a big change. And a posting, again, could be on your website. It could be in your break room. It could be a posting that is done on behalf of your organization by a third party, a consulting firm, a recruiting firm, whatever that is. And the companies have to provide an employee who is offered either an internal transfer or a promotion, also the wage scale. So what this is basically doing is this is allowing for current and future employees to have a better understanding of what the pay range is. So one of the biggest kind of questions is, well, how much do you need to share? And so a wage scale or a salary range, can be very wide, it could be very narrow, but what the actual guidance that has come from the state is reflecting that it has to be a reasonable and genuinely expected range of compensation for the job. It should be from the lowest to the highest. So that would indicate a full range. And basically, if the employer doesn't already have a wage scale or range, they have to develop one. So, so if we think about this from a recruiting perspective, you're going to create a new job. Well, you need to create what that wage band looks like. And you can have a portion of the range be identified as kind of the new hire range, so a subset of a broader range. However, the entire salary range must be disclosed. And I actually copied that sentence directly from the guidance that has come from the state, because I think that's an important piece of the puzzle. A lot of organizations that I've been talking to, like, they're saying, well, can we just provide the low end of the range? Can we hire just the range that we would consider hiring somebody into for that position? And the answer is pretty clear that yes, you can share a subset of it, but you also have to share the entire range. The other piece of the puzzle is if you have individuals that are commission-based or get some sort of a piecemeal, that too must be disclosed in the posting.
And can I ask a quick clarifying question?
Absolutely.
Probably applies to the last slide, but for an Alaskan employer that has one employee in Washington, this still applies to that one employee?
So the way that the guidance is written is it's 15 employees in the state.
Okay, so the one employee, this probably wouldn't apply to that employer then, with one employee in Washington state.
Correct. That would be my interpretation. What I would also say is that with any new legislation, the guidance is great, but where you really start to realize how it's going to be implemented is when there becomes case law. So that's the kind of we're a little bit ahead of ourselves of how do we prepare based on what we know today, with the idea that as employers are challenged by how they have complied with this particular rule, there may become more clear evidence of how to actually comply. But that is how I would interpret it today.
A second question here says, can you elaborate on the new hire range in quotes? I mean, I think that's in related to the new hire range of pay.
Mm-hmm. So in a kind of a traditional compensation methodology or approach, if you've got a salary range, you've got a minimum, a midpoint, and a maximum. So you've got kind of the full spectrum of what the opportunity is for an incumbent to make in that particular job. A best practice would be if you hire somebody in, you typically would hire them in the lower portion of that range for a variety of reasons. They might not have all of the experience that is required for the job. They clearly need to get up to speed on your organization and your processes and how to actually execute. So the idea is if you hire somebody into a new position, it is usually at a more of a emerging type of a level, whereas the rest of the salary range would remain as that individual becomes more competent, becomes fully performing in their role, and allows for kind of high performance. So if you think about it as kind of a low to high, typically a new hire would be in that lower end. So the entire salary range has to be disclosed, but in reality, you might only hire between the minimum and the midpoint. That might be a policy that you determine is how you want to address bringing people into the organization.
Great, thank you. That's it for now.
Awesome. All right. So that's the law. Now we're going to shift into how to get ready for it. What should you be thinking about? And this slide is I think an idea of what kind of questions you might be asked. We're anticipating, at least in our client base, that the current employees are going to be the biggest challenge. it's not necessarily people that are applying for jobs. So if you think about the fact that you have all of your jobs posted on your website, and every new posting will have a new salary range, you can bet your bottom dollar that current employees are going to be out reviewing what those salary ranges are for new positions, just to kind of get a sense of what that looks like. And so our anticipation is that those current employees are going to ask some hard questions. It's not going to be the candidates. So things like, hey, what is our pay philosophy? Hey, how did you develop our salary ranges? Who did you compare us against? How is my job compared to others? Why is my job at a different grade than a colleague? Are people paid more than me that have been hired recently? I think a really reasonable one is a competitor company, insert whatever that company is, pays more for this same job. I want a raise. In order to be prepared to answer these potentially very difficult questions, if you don't have a solid foundation in how you think about compensation, these really will be difficult conversations. And there's not necessarily going to be a clear answer that everybody can kind of get behind. So what I'd like to spend the rest of our time on is thinking about how to prepare to answer these hard questions. So I'm going to go through each one of these items, in much more detail, but you want to think about your philosophy. You want to make sure your job descriptions are updated. You want to evaluate your jobs. You want to have some sort of a range. You need to figure out kind of how to consistently think about that, and determine how you're going to pay people based on the ranges, kind of what that methodology is. Make sure your policies are ready. And it might be towards the bottom of this list, but I think educating employees and managers is going to be key to making sure that this law doesn't create disruption in your organization. And then determining your recruitment approach and considering conducting a pay equity review, depending on how big you are, how broadly you have multiple people doing similar jobs. So with that, we're going to jump into developing a compensation philosophy. Regardless of whether or not you have it written down, my guess is everyone on this call, their organization has a compensation philosophy. They think about how competitive they want to be. They identify what talent markets they compete in. They identify what drives pay. Is it performance? Is it tenure? And it provides a kind of a link to your mission, your vision, your values, your culture, and it really lends consistency in thinking. So it explains the why behind the pay and creates that framework for consistency. You should think about whether or not you want to lead the market, whether or not based on your financial situation, you can't lead the market. Maybe you need to meet the market or even lag the market. What industries, how do you deal with geography? Especially if you've got employees in multiple locations post-pandemic, we've been working with a lot of our clients around how to think about and how to fairly pay people in a variety of different geographies that have very different costs of labor. And another part of a philosophy is how broadly do you want to share it? And I think a lot of this legislation is forcing organizations, even if they didn't share it broadly before, they need to now.
And can I interrupt with another question?
Yes, absolutely.
Does this employer like to know if they need to post bonus target and stock target on their postings, or just say that the job is bonus and stock eligible?
My understanding is that if it is a calculation, if it is a formula that is calculated on a regular basis, and I'm thinking more of commissions, that needs to be in there because that becomes a performance factor. I would recommend that if it is bonus eligible or long-term incentive eligible, that you mention that. I don't believe you have to put the percentages of target payouts in the posting. I think it would be a good idea to allude to that there is additional incentive pay. But if it's a more of a discretionary program, or if it's broadly company based, or if it's individually goal performance oriented, I don't believe you have to be specific as it relates to that.
Is that the same answer for profit sharing as well?
Correct.
Okay.
I would put as far as profit sharing, that you have a profit sharing plan. That would be, in my mind, in kind of that benefit summary, kind of the detailed benefit summary, that you provide medical, dental, vision. You've got 3 different plans to choose from: a high deductible and a more traditional PPO. Vacation and sick time is our PTO is part of that package. For me, the kind of that retirement or profit sharing would also fall into that broader bucket of, here are additional offerings.
Yeah.
To that.
One more question. What about the concern about potential antitrust? Do you think employers will potentially try to price fix and align base pay in the future?
I hope not. What you want to do, which is what I'm going to get to next, is you want to market price your jobs. As long as you're market pricing your jobs, and I'm going to flip to that slide. As long as you're market pricing your jobs and you're not colluding, you're not working with all of your competitors to price fix. If you're using third-party published surveys, benchmarking your jobs to understand what the market value is for those transferable skills, you should be fine. What you shouldn't be doing is calling up your buddy and saying, what do you pay for your senior accountants?
Great, thank you.
Okay. So that just dovetails beautifully into the kind of market pricing your jobs. So in order to be fair and consistent and have a methodology that is explainable and describable to your employees, this is really what we are recommending employers do. It gives you a solid understanding of what the external value is. It can help guide your pay decisions. It's proactive. You're monitoring that competitive landscape rather than being reactionary. And it really provides a framework to establish competitive and equitable pay. So if you're going to do that, you want to make sure that you select salary surveys that are reputable and are provided by third-party consulting firms or third-party survey companies, where they're the ones that are going to make sure that you're not colluding with pay decisions. They're the ones that are gathering that data. They're an independent third party, and you want to make sure that you're using high-quality salary surveys. So if you're going to go buy a salary survey or 2 or 3 in order to be able to do this work, you want to make sure that you're selecting a survey that you've got comparable organizations. If you're in finance, you got to make sure that they've got finance participants. If you're in manufacturing, you want to make sure you get a survey that has really solid manufacturing participation and participation data in it. You want to make sure that they've got comparable jobs. Yeah, we use a lot of surveys. We have a fully licensed salary survey library that we use in our engagements with our clients. And it's really important to make sure that you're looking at those comparable jobs and making sure you've got a good sample size. So you don't want the 1 or 2 or 3 data points. You want surveys that have 50, 60, 100, 1,000 data points to be able to pull from. Want to make sure that you're getting the most recent survey. A lot of organizations stopped buying surveys in the last few years, and with COVID and all of the changes that have happened. If you've got a survey that's pre-COVID, I would not suggest you use it. The market has changed dramatically. And then obviously there are other components that go into what surveys you use, but there's direct costs, which is how much does this cost to buy? But there's also indirect costs. A lot of survey companies require that you participate, require that you submit your employee data in order to advance their database. So understand that piece of it. And reliability. I mean, data validation is a really important component. I know there are a lot of resources that are out there that are free, that are employee submitted. You know, it's a data point, but you want to make sure that you've got good, reliable data validation as part of kind of whatever survey sources you're going to use. And a best practice is to use 3 survey matches for every single job. So you're not just looking at one survey, you're looking at a conglomeration of 2 or 3 or 4 surveys to really triangulate on what the market value is for that job.
And do you think freesalary.com is reliable? That's a question from one of the participants.
It's okay. It's okay. I mean, it's not, I mean, there's a spectrum, right? I mean, there's a spectrum. Self-reported data, I think, is problematic. I mean, that's just my personal opinion, because there's no review, there's no validation, there's no proof. You know, a lot of people don't necessarily understand the nuances of how salary surveys work, but it's okay. I mean, it's, as my mom would say, it's better than a sharp stick in the eye, and better than making stuff up.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you. Thanks.
So once you market price your jobs, you want to develop salary ranges. And this is just an example of a salary structure that we have built for one of our clients. It's a similar template that we use in a lot of the work that we do. And you know, and you want to make sure that as you think about what data you're using and what data you want to share, think about kind of how broad you want ranges to be. Many years ago, there was a big push for broadbands. And you know, and I think broadbands under some of this legislation will start to fall out of favor, because if you have a band that goes from 50 to 125, kind of that question that employees will inevitably ask is, well, how do I get to the $125,000 part of my job? I think that you need to think kind of strategically about how broad and how wide salary ranges are. But you know, for those of you that don't work in the compensation arena, this is based on the market data. It's calibrated with the market salaries. It's a tool to help manage internal and external equity as it relates to similar jobs, similar paid jobs. It helps provide a framework for making good salary decisions. It supports pay for performance, and you know, it really allows for recognition and pay progression as the skills and responsibilities and authority and autonomy of positions continue to grow.
And can you comment on, back to the 3 surveys you're recommending? One of the participants is saying, you know, that's could be quite a bit of money. And are there any other options for nonprofits?
There are some not-for-profit surveys that are not super expensive. You know, I mean, again, there's a full spectrum of, you know, surveys that are $500, $750. And that, you know, so I'm thinking specifically in not-for-profit, to the for-profit world, where if you're in a tech company and you need to buy Radford, that can be $15,000 or $20,000 depending on kind of what you need. So there are alternatives, and you know, and whoever that is, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to provide some insights. Many of them are association surveys, which are good, valid sources of data if the association is similar to what industry or, you know, what your mission is for your not-for-profit.
Thank you.
So we've got your philosophy, we've market priced the jobs, we've built out salary ranges. So that's all great. The next step to think about is, where do you fall? Where do people fall? Where do incumbents fall within that range? So the salary range is all about the job. And then the pay placement concept is all about the employee. How long have they been in their job? What experience do they have prior to coming to your organization? Do they have a level of education that sets them apart? Do they have certifications, or do they have, you know, all kinds of different things? Performance, how's their performance? What's the company's ability to pay? I mean, the financial performance is an important component to kind of where people fall. It's also key in how you set your ranges too, of how competitive you can be. This helps with setting a framework for recruiting, you know, pay placement for new hires, kind of back to that one of the earlier questions, where, you know, if you're going to bring somebody new in, you know, I would expect that they're going to be beneath the midpoint of the range, because they don't have experience with your organization. No matter how great their previous experience is, it's usually not completely 100% hitting the ground running. The external economic environment also has a factor in where individuals fall in this. And certainly you can't forget about pay equity and making sure that you've got fair pay for equal work. So something like this is again is an example of a type of a pay placement guideline. We look at Compa-Ratio, or the position in their range, kind of where they fall within that spectrum. There's another kind of different way of looking at pay placement. And so this is just another kind of sample way to think about it, where if you have people that are entry level or developing, again, the concept would be they're kind of lower in the range, fully proficient. They're hovering, you know, right around the midpoint of that range at fully functioning. And then the rest of the range is reserved for expert, high performers, key individuals, and then certainly people that have a mastery of their particular job that they are doing.
And can we assume that these regulations apply equally to union and non-union? So if an employer has union employees, they already have a requirement where wages are public.
Mm-hmm.
Do they need to do anything different than they're already doing, or did they just have to do this for hiring non-union employees?
In my experience, a union step scale that is under a collective bargaining agreement would have already met the pay transparency regulations. So for the folks that fall under a CBA, more than likely that is going to meet the requirements, especially if it's a more traditional step scale where, you know, it is completely based on tenure. That is a very easy way to kind of articulate not only what the pay range is, but where someone falls in that range.
Great.
So for the most part, it would be for their non-collective bargaining agreement type positions.
Thank you.
Is where I'm envisioning some of the additional work.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All righty, so next step, I feel like I'm kind of piling on. For those of you that maybe don't have a lot of this infrastructure, there's a number of things to think about. But you want to make sure that you're reviewing your policies and your administration practices as it relates to compensation. If you don't have policies or practices, you should probably think about developing some. So thinking about pay placement, where people should be in the range, whether or not you've got incentive plans, how those incentive plans dovetail into a total compensation picture. How do you treat people that get promoted that are under the range, or long tenured or super high performing employees that are at the top of the range? How do you deal with merit increases? Is pay equity an area that you want to make sure that you've got not only policies in place, but you've got results to be able to articulate around an analysis or a pay gap review that you've done. And it's just really important to be aware of the consequences of compensation decisions, hiring, promoting, evaluating, annual increases. All of that is going to start having a really bright light shown on it. And so the sooner you can be ready, prepared, have all of your policies and practices identified, that will then really allow for education and communication. And that's kind of this is where the rubber hits the road. I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into getting to this point. But if you think about those hard questions that I threw up at the very beginning of our talk, got to be ready to answer some of those. And for most organizations, those employees are going to go to their managers. And there's a survey that I read recently that said only 19% of organizations feel confident that their managers have the ability to have a tough conversation about pay. So if that's the case, and there was not a requirement for transparency, there's a gap that really needs to be filled. But in order to educate your managers, you have to have a point of view, an approach, policies, guidelines, frequently asked questions, whatever that looks like in your organization. But I would start absolutely with sharing your philosophy. That's an easy one. You want to be competitive with the market. You compete with these types of industries. You look at pay for performance for how to reward people, or tenure, or some other factor. Skills, pay for skills is another way of kind of rewarding and determining pay. But share that philosophy and make sure that it's that all of your programs align with that, and then be really intentional and strategic about how you communicate. Having managers be your front line and be prepared to have some of these conversations is key and critical. They should know how salaries are set. They should know how pay grades are set. They should be able to articulate why somebody falls at a particular stage in their grade. Are they new to the job? Do they have performance issues? There's all kinds of things that can go into a really robust conversation. I think that as soon as there's enough data out there, as organizations continue to hire and they continue to post these ranges, people are going to kind of piece together what a full salary structure looks like, and what other jobs are similar in my job band or in my grade level. Why is this one at a higher level than mine? And I think more importantly, this is where it's not a tough conversation about kind of explaining how compensation is administered in your organization, but then it becomes a development opportunity. How can you as a manager or you as an organization support your employee to acquire the skills to be able to move along in their pay progression in their career? And really having tools for managers to use, frequently asked questions. You could take all those questions at the beginning in that initial slide and start to develop answers and start to figure out a way to distribute and socialize those answers within your organization.
And do you know if using a hiring agency or headhunting agency where you've already communicated your salary range to them, is that part of meeting the requirement, or can that be meeting the requirement, or is this going to be additional?
As I understand it, when that headhunter agency, typically they post the jobs as well, whether or not it's on an internal or a job board, the pay range will have to be on there. So that is my understanding of how a third-party agency would assist in a company complying for this law. So I don't believe that there's any additional posting requirement that would be outside of whether or not a company is posting the job directly or a third-party agency is posting it. As long as a salary range is posted, my understanding is that it would cover compliance.
Great, thank you.
So back to what needs to be done. So here's your checklist. So update your job descriptions. document your philosophy, market price your jobs and build structures. They don't have to be as formal as what I showed you, but the transparency requirements are only going to continue to expand. Many of our clients, even if they are only in Washington, are taking a national approach at this, which is they're going to post ranges for every job, no matter what state it's in. That's how a lot of the Colorado companies figured out how to comply, where they didn't necessarily need two different methodologies for posting jobs, especially as many organizations have allowed for virtual work, various locations, different geographies. So, and then you want to make sure you determine your point of view and how you think about pay placement for your current employees. That's a big part of being able to, in effect, defend the current pay and the current placement of that particular job. Upstate your guidelines and your policies, and develop communication materials. And I would start with managers. I know that sometimes, and this is very cultural as well, a lot of organizations look at it differently, but I would start and arm your managers with the information to be able to communicate how you determine pay in your organization for your existing employees. And then call us if you want help. This is what we do. So I put a slide in here of my contact information, and please reach out if you've got questions. If you have a unique situation, I'm happy to chat with you and do some strategic, idea gathering. And if you need ideas on surveys or whatever that looks like, I'm happy to help. This is a big step for a lot of employers to get to the point that they can be in compliance and not have disruption in your organization, which I think is the nervousness of a lot of executives when this particular regulation was passed.
Awesome. So I do have a couple additional questions here. We can answer here at the end. What if we hired someone at a pay that is higher than the range posted based on skills and education? How would the state view that? And will the state be publishing more administrative guidance on this law? So far, very little has been published.
Totally agree. And I sure hope they do publish some more. My guess is that during a comment period, they're getting a lot of questions that they probably need to answer. And so if you hire above the range and you posted the full range, I don't believe that there is any penalty for doing that. There are lots of situations that I can think of off the top of my head where you might have ended up finding a fabulous candidate that's completely overqualified. I was talking to a client yesterday about that. They posted for an IT director, and they ended up getting a candidate that was more of a VP level. So I don't think that it is problematic from a compliance perspective. I do think that you need to be thoughtful about how you treat that person going forward, how you make sure that from an equity perspective that is addressed. If there are others that are similarly situated in that same kind of job category, that's a different problem than posting a range. Then that becomes compression. It becomes potentially pay equity if they're in a protected class. So there's definitely a little bit of a slippery slope, but my understanding is that there's no requirement that you have to hire within that range if you found somebody that was materially qualified, beyond even your wildest expectations.
Great. We got a few more pop in here. So no matter how much official communication documents HR builds, there will always be false info circling within an organization. How does HR best handle that?
So, managers are the best line of defense. So really focus on your managers, making sure that managers have a proactive approach to dealing with potential questions that are swirling around there. And you're right, people make up stuff. They're always going to talk about it, but if you can frame the conversation in a way that you're controlling the narrative, you're going to have a better chance of being successful. You're never going to be able to hit every single individual, and everyone is going to have their own opinion on pay and competitive pay and pay equity. But I guess where I would go is start with your managers. Once you have them trained, I would do broad employee education sessions about compensation. That's where that's all you can do, is to provide more information in the hopes that employees will understand. They might not agree, but at least they'll understand the methodology. In my career, I've been doing this for a really long time. And, a lot of times compensation is just kind of perceived to be kind of, behind the black curtain, Oz and the Wizard of Oz, it's all just kind of smoke and mirrors. And I think the more you can explain your methodology, you can at least have an informed decision or an informed discussion that people can agree to disagree.
Great. Let's see. Can you provide any more specifics around the benefits information that needs to be included in the posting? How much detail is needed?
So the guidance is very vague on that. I interpreted it, and again, this is not been tested in any court of law, but my understanding is a paragraph that summarizes the types of benefits that you have, the types of leave programs you have, whether I would suggest that you put whether or not you contribute to the cost of some of these. If there's a way to say that you pay 100% of employee premiums for medical, dental, vision, or something like that, so that you can get a little bit of a sense of how robust the package is, and it's not really vague. We provide health insurance and life insurance and retirement. The more you can be fairly specific without creating a book, the better. If you've got a great match, put it in there. If you've got profit sharing, or you've got additional things, or life balance items, work-life balance items, this is going to end up being part of your marketing and part of your employee value proposition. So the fact that there's typically a lot of money spent on the benefit side from a company perspective, I get every penny you can out of that from a marketing perspective.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any different guidelines for roles that are very senior, such as VPs, senior VPs, or even EVPs, who may be part of executive committees and or officers of the company?
No, not right now.
Okay.
Which, again, back to those hard questions.
Yep. What are the consequences for employers who do not comply?
So there is there are penalties. I think there's a 500 per occurrence. There's a 5,000 penalty for, I think I'd have to go back and look. I didn't spend a ton of time on that, but there are financial penalties if you are not complying, and current employees and or applicants can file that. So it's not completely egregious. It's it's not going to be like an FLSA settlement or something like that, unless you're hiring a ton of people, you had a ton of applicants and you did none of this. I mean, I think it could compound that way. But I think that as if we look to Colorado as kind of how they have worked through some of the complaints that have been filed. I think initially, and again, this is truly just my opinion, I think that they'll probably do warnings for a little bit of time to allow people to kind of get up to speed. That is what Colorado initially did. And then as it becomes more and more kind of in the rearview mirror that, hey, you should have known about this. Hey, you should have been working on this. I think that the fines will start to come to follow at that point.
So we've got someone who's about to retire, and they're going through the process of replacing their role. They are in HR, AP, and AR. Wondering if it would be best to wait for the new hire to be involved with setting this up, or they have very little in place that needs to be set up. But yeah.
I mean, waiting is an option. I think part of my question back to that individual would be, how much recruiting are they doing? How many job postings are they doing? Is it once a year that you have a new job, or are you in a tech company and you've got 500 openings? I think that the magnitude of the implications would inform kind of my answer.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. The more new hires you have, maybe the more urgency there is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a client that if you were to go to their website, I think they have 400 openings. That's going to be really hard to say, hey, I just wanted to wait until my replacement was here, knowing that they needed to get some infrastructure in place.
Okay. As an organization built by M&A, we have some grandfathered folks who came to us higher than we would have paid them. We've honored that, but can we publish our current range, or do we have to include everything that exists?
That's a great question. My interpretation of the guidance and my understanding and my conversations with my attorney friends would say that it is the current range.
So they don't have to publish those that they grandfathered in at a higher.
I don't think so, but boy, if you have an employment attorney, I might ask on that one.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that'd be kind of a bummer because you made an exception, and then it doesn't really affect your pay range for how you're currently hiring.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
Let's see, how will this, you may have answered this a little bit already. How will this affect bonuses? If we have pay ranges, but also reserve the right to give spot bonuses, profit-based bonuses, et cetera, how to navigate transparency and equity requirements? So I think you answered before that if it's discretionary, just indicating that there is a discretionary bonus potential, but you don't have to put the range. Is that correct?
And frankly, if it's a spot bonus and it's not broadly distributed, I wouldn't worry so much about that. That's more about recognition. At least the written intent, are to say what the conversations were in committees leading up to the verbiage being approved and signed, is primarily on base pay. I mean, that's where they're starting. So kind of back to the idea that I think that this is an evolution that will continue to morph. I can see at some point even more transparency as it relates to variable components of pay. But at this point, a spot bonus program or a discretionary program, I don't think you need to worry about.
Great. And then I think you may have answered this as well. Does this Washington law apply to executive job hunters searching for C-suite roles?
Yep, as far as I know.
Applies to everybody. No exceptions other than employers with less than 15 employees in the state of Washington. It applies to everybody.
My understanding. If
Great.
the job is posted, my understanding is that the range must be provided.
Okay. That's it for questions. So let's see. You provided your contact information that's in the slides. We'll send out the recording and the slides to every registrant. True Benefits, Propel Insurance, Wilson Albers, Davidson Benefits Planning, and CSNW Benefits. We all thank you so much for joining us today, along with Ann and CompensationWorks. Please reach out directly to Ann or to your Alair Group firm with any additional questions, and we'll get those answered for you. And have a great rest of your week. Again, thank you, Ann. Thank you so much. Very informative.
Absolutely. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks all.